Hello everyone. Over the past several videos, we saw how to arrive at universal quantum computation from a reasonable finite gate set. In this video, we will switch gears to formally focus on the different types of quantum algorithms we can use to obtain some type of advantage over classical computing. In this lecture, we will focus on the quantum search problem and see how we can obtain an unstructured advantage using Grover's algorithm. Suppose I have a collection of n items and I want to search through them to find a particular element. Without assuming any prior structure beforehand, such as sorting, for instance, the best we can do classically is a naive O of n linear sequential search, where we just check each element one by one until we find what we're looking for. Can we do any better in the quantum setting? Well, as we saw in the first lecture, we can use quantum parallelism to evaluate a function on every input in a given superposition at the same time. Consequently, if we create a superposition over all the elements we are searching through, we can easily evaluate a function that tests whether a given element is what we're looking for on each of the states in the superposition with just a single application of a unitary. However, if we try and measure the state at this point, all we'll get is just a random element from the superposition. Hence, it turns out that this particular procedure is identical to the classical protocol of just picking elements uniformly randomly until we find what we're looking for. However, what if instead of just uniformly sampling elements until we find what we're looking for, we instead alter the underlying distribution over elements, such that the probability of sampling one of the elements we want is significantly increased? This is the principle behind Grover's algorithm, and it allows us to solve the search problem using O of root n calls to a function that checks if a given element is what we're looking for. Okay, but why exactly do we care about this? After all, do we really need quantum computers to search for elements in a given list or array? Well, the idea is that for many NP-hard problems, for which we of course have no known polynomial algorithm, the best method we have is often just to enumerate over potential solutions until we find something that works. This amounts to just a naive search over big N solutions, where big N is exponential in the size little n of the input parameters. Since we can check solutions in polynomial time, in other words, polylog big N time, this classically gives us a naive runtime that looks like O of n polylog n. Note that here we can use this O tilde notation to mean that the asymptotic relation holds up to polylogarithmic factors in n. This is just a useful technique to make the notation a little bit simpler. However, using Grover's algorithm, we can instead do this in time O of square root of n polylog n, in other words, O tilde of square root of n, which, while still exponential in little n, can be much smaller than the classical version. In general, however, the main advantage of Grover's algorithm is that it is very versatile. Okay, so how does this algorithm actually work? Well, it helps to look at a conceptual picture first. Suppose we define psi as the uniform superposition over all possible bit strings. Then, let's suppose that alpha represents a uniform superposition over bit strings that are not marked, and let beta represent a uniform superposition over bit strings that are marked. Here I define an element x to be marked if f of x equals 1, according to some function f of our choice. For instance, maybe f could check if x is a solution to a given problem or not, which is possible to do efficiently if the problem is in NP, for example. Note that here we define the number of marked elements, in other words, the number of elements that we would be satisfied with sampling, as m. Because the support of alpha is disjoint with that of beta, we have that these vectors are trivially orthogonal. Furthermore, because psi is simply the following superposition of alpha and beta, we have that it lies in the 2D subspace spanned by alpha and beta. In other words, we have the following picture. A priori, we do not know what either states alpha or beta are, and our goal is to take an easy-to-prepare state like psi and get it to look close to beta. So, how can we do this? Well, we can observe that we can rotate this vector psi in the subspace by by reflecting around axes in the subspace. Let's define the angle between psi and alpha as theta over 2. We assume here that theta over 2 is less than pi over 4, meaning that less than half of the elements are marked. This is a reasonable assumption, since if more than half the elements were marked, we could just measure directly and sample a marked element with probability at least 1/2. Suppose we call the reflection about alpha the unitary operator u alpha. We then have that u alpha psi takes psi to a vector that differs in angle theta over 2 from alpha in the opposite direction. Suppose we now reflect this across psi via u psi to get the state g psi, where g is the composition of these two reflections. We then have that this state differs from alpha by an angle of 3 theta over 2. Repeating this procedure again, we have that g squared psi differs by angle 5 theta over 2, and so on and so forth. The goal is that by applying g a total of r times, we will eventually become very close to beta. We can define what the optimal r is as follows. By induction, we have that g to the r psi is simply cosine of 2r plus 1/2 times theta, alpha, plus sine of 2r plus 1/2 theta, beta. To maximize the amplitude of the beta component, we need the alpha component to vanish, meaning that cosine of 2r plus 1/2 theta must be close to 0. In other words, we have that 2r plus 1/2 theta can be chosen to be pi over 2. Rearranging this expression, we have the following approximate expression for r. Now, of course, r must be an integer, so we have that the true value of r is simply this expression rounded to the closest integer. Since the closer we are to this value, the higher the amplitude of beta will be. Rewriting this rounding expression in terms of the floor function, and using the fact that sine of theta over 2 is the square root of m over n, we have the following expression for the number of Grover iterations. You might be worried about the fact that we are rounding here, since this does mean that when we finally measure the state at the end, there is a non-zero probability of measuring an unmarked element. However, since each rotation shifts the angle by theta, we have that our final angle will be at most theta over 2 radians away from pi over 2. Since we explicitly bounded theta over 2 by pi over 4, this means that the probability of measuring a marked element is at least 1/2. Furthermore, in practice, since n is much larger than m, this probability will usually be extremely close to 1. Getting back to the number of Grover iterations, you may be wondering how this quantity scales asymptotically as n gets larger. Well, we can observe that since sine of x is less than or equal to x, x is less than or equal to arc sine of x, over the domain from minus pi over 2 to pi over 2, since arc sine is an increasing function here. This means that we can upper bound r by this square root expression, giving us an upper bound of pi over 4 times the square root of n over m, or in other words, O of square root of n over m Grover iterations. Consequently, we have that the query complexity of this procedure is O of square root of n over m, matching the stated O of square root of n complexity at the beginning of this video, where we assume that m equals 1. Okay, that's all well and good. But how do we actually implement the reflections we talked about in the first place? Well, reflecting about alpha is pretty straightforward. We just need to negate the marked elements. In other words, we map x to minus 1 to the f of x times x. This can be done by using the UF unitary, which maps the state xy to xy xor f of x. By initializing the ancilla qubit in the state, minus, we have that UF incurs a phase factor of minus 1 if f of x equals 1, and 1 if f of x equals 0, giving us the desired reflection. Okay, so implementing the U alpha reflection is pretty straightforward, but what about U psi? Well, we can write a reflection about psi via the Householder operator 2 psi psi minus I, which is essentially an operator that negates the component orthogonal to psi and leaves the rest unchanged. The reflection about psi is known as the Grover diffusion operator and can be written in terms of a reflection about 0 by factoring out the Hadamard transform. This remaining operator simply maps 0 to 0 and x to minus x for x greater than 0. We can implement this easily up to a phase using n-1 qubit controlled z-gate, which is controlled on an input of all zeros. Of course, this is just the same as a standard n-1 controlled z-gate sandwiched between n x gates on both sides. Composing u alpha and u psi gives us the desired Grover operation G, whose full circuit description is given as follows. Note that I have just made some optimizations here using the fact that hxh equals z. Altogether, we then have the following quantum circuit for Grover's algorithm. As you can see, once we define G, it's very simple. Just apply G over and over until we are close enough to the perfect superposition of marked states to measure a marked output with high probability. Here's the algorithm written in full. For simplicity, I will assume that big N equals 2 to the little n and m equals 1, but you can always generalize it for other cases as well. We start with the state 0 to the n minus. We then perform a Hadamard transform on all the qubits to get the state psi minus. We then apply g to the r for r on the order of square root n. Lastly, we measure the first n qubits to sample a marked state with high probability. Okay, this is all well and good, but is this really the best we can do for the search problem in the quantum setting? After all, maybe there are some tricks that we can use to get something better than a quadratic speedup. Well, if you think this, unfortunately, this is not the case. To see why, consider the following argument. For simplicity, we consider the case with a single marked element omega, but you can generalize this for m marked elements as well. We will then define u omega as the oracle that marks this unique solution, just as we had defined u alpha previously. We then have that a general quantum algorithm consists of alternating between applying some unitary and the oracle t times. Suppose we perform this procedure on some initial zero state psi 0, producing the state psi omega of t. Next, consider the state phi of t, produced using the exact same sequence. Though we instead substitute the u omega for I, meaning that the oracle does not mark any elements. The argument is then that in order to distinguish a marked element from the rest, we have to choose t sufficiently large such that these states are noticeably different. To do this, we begin by upper bounding the L2 distance between psi omega t and phi t. Using a telescoping sum argument where we define intermediate states where the first j iterations use I while the remaining iterations use u omega, we obtain the following sum of L2 distances between u omega phi t and phi t, summed over all t as our upper bound. Using the fact that u omega acts identically to I except on omega, we have that the right-hand side can be written in terms of inner products of omega and phi t as follows. Using the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, we can upper bound the square of the sum by the sum of squares times t. Furthermore, if we get a global bound by just summing over all omegas, we arrive at this clean upper bound of 4t squared. Okay, so what now? Well, to figure out how t relates to n, all we have to do is find a lower bound for this expression in terms of n. We begin by expanding the square of the distance in terms of the inner product, which we can lower bound as follows. Before we progress further, it's useful to consider what the expression for psi omega t actually represents. In particular, once we arrive at the state from a generic protocol, the idea is that we can then measure the state in the standard basis to sample a marked element with high probability. In particular, we can consider a set of projection operators pi x that project onto the corresponding state x. As we had discussed in the actual algorithm, the probability that we measure a marked state is typically close to 1, but it's not exactly 1. Consequently, let's say that the expected value of pi omega with respect to the omega state is lower bounded by some 1 over minus delta, meaning that we have a probability of at most delta of failure. With this, we can rewrite the right-hand side of this expression in terms of a sum over projection operators, since the sum of projection operators is identity matrix. If we split this sum into parts where x equals omega and x is not equal to omega, we can then apply the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality to each of these individual inner products, using the fact that the norm of all these projected states is at most 1, and the norm of psi omega projected onto the complementary subspace to omega is at most the square root of delta. Lastly, if we apply Cauchy-Schwarz to this sum, treating it as an inner product between pi omega phi t norms and a 1's vector, we can upper bound the sum, and therefore lower bound the whole expression by introducing this 2 square root n term. If we now write the lower upper bounds together, you can see that we can obtain the following relationship between t and n. Since the n term dominates the square root term for large n, we can obtain the following asymptotic lower bound on t. Assuming constant success probability, we have that delta is at most O of 1, meaning that t is omega of square root n. Consequently, since Grover's algorithm saturates this lower bound in the number of function calls, we have that it is optimal, at least up to a constant factor. Before I end this lecture, there are a couple of concluding remarks I want to make about this algorithm. For one, I assumed throughout this lecture that we had prior knowledge of the number of elements that we are looking for. However, in practice, this is rarely ever the case. So, what do? Well, as it turns out, the answer lies in eigenvalue estimation. In particular, since the Grover operator G acts as a rotation in the subspace spanned by alpha and beta by an angle theta, we can use information about its eigenvalues to compute theta, and therefore m. This can be done using the quantum phase estimation protocol, which we will discuss in a later video. Secondly, I wanted to acknowledge the fact that while Grover's algorithm uses O of square root of n function calls, this does not mean that the gate complexity itself is exactly O of root n. In particular, if we are using a gate set like Clifford plus t, we often require something like O of root n log n gates to run this algorithm. Since Grover's algorithm only achieves a polynomial speedup over the classical solution, this would seem to imply that quantum computers likely cannot solve all NP problems in polynomial time, as an exponential speedup for problems like 3-set seems unlikely. Nevertheless, the fact that this speedup can be performed without any structural assumptions means that it is very versatile and is always a nice way to get some kind of advantage over the classical approach. If we do assume some structure, we can show that quantum algorithms can give us much more significant speedups. We will see this for ourselves in the next video, where we introduce the quantum Fourier transform. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.